Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That guy's Bryan. I'm Vince, and
My fault.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. This is IB After Dark. This is what you get, folks. It's been a long but wonderful day here in Northern Indiana, and we are going to talk about a lot of things, actually. Like, this is going to be a little bit different than normal, so I want to set that up for everybody. Obviously, this is upon further review. We jumped into the film today. We've got a lot to talk about from the offense and the defense and all of that fun stuff. Yes, no doubt that is coming. But the curveball, the audible for today, depending on what sports reference you want to use or sports analogy, our first segment normally is Bryan's first reaction to the game, because he's not usually on the post-game show. But if you were with us yesterday afternoon, then you know that Bryan was on the post-game show, and so he was able to give his thoughts, about the game and his gut reaction and all that fun stuff. So we don't have that segment. And so what we decided to do, because it sparked conversation between the two of us today when it went down, is Bryan and I are going to talk about the AP poll and a little bit the coaches poll, but mostly the AP poll and what happened with Notre Dame today and what that means and, what things look like and all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to break down the AP poll, basically, and what that means for college football playoff. What would it look like if the playoff were to start today? All of those kind of fun topics. And so that's going to be our first segment today, Bryan. And it's going to be a little bit of fun, and then we'll jump into the film. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds great to me, Mr. D'Addario. I'm just happy that you let me come along for the ride on my show. I appreciate that, man. I thank you so much.
It's what we do. There's always room for you on the hype train.
But it is interesting. I mean, the reason we're shifting it up a little bit is because I don't get surprised very often by what the national media does. I think I do a pretty good job of nailing how they're going to think and react to things. And I was shocked. Yeah. Shocked by the rankings. But the reason we're talking about it upon further review is because I think a big part of it is, I know what the spin is about the rankings jump, but I think a big part of it was yesterday's performance. And I'll explain why I think that is once we get rocking and rolling.
So let's just jump right into it, Bryan. AP poll came out today. This is Sunday, October 27th. AP poll came out this afternoon. And specifically, Notre Dame was ranked 8th, up from 12. So up 4 spots from last week to this week after, their 51-14 win over Navy. And a lot of movement, from like 5 to 16. There's a lot of movement kind of in that neighborhood. Obviously nothing really at the top. There wasn't a bunch of, upsets or anything really at the top of the poll this weekend. But a lot of movement kind of like 4 through 16-ish, I would say. And so we're going to kind of break it down. We're going to talk about it. And I'm really kind of excited about it, Bryan.
Yeah, me too. This is going to be fun, especially. And I'm in that weird, it's election season mode. Yeah. And so I'm like looking at all these polls and everything. And then, the college football playoff thing comes out next Tuesday. Like I might have like a polls rankings overload next weekend, Vince. But like 1 through 4 didn't change in the AP poll. Correct. 4, 5, and 6 flipped. So Miami jumped Texas. And then 7 was the same. After
so really
that,
8. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
After that, from up and down to 20, so from 8 to 21, nobody stayed the same except for Indiana.
Right.
Although Indiana did gain votes. Like they're closer to moving up than they were. So I was fascinated by all that movement, Vince, because a lot of it, like Clemson dropped 2 spots and didn't play. Iowa State dropped a spot and didn't play. Obviously, LSU dropped 8 spots. K-State dropped a spot with a win because it was an ugly win over a bad team. Ole Miss dropped a spot despite, I believe, a double-digit but ugly win over
12-point win over Oklahoma, yeah.
Right. Army stayed the same. And then actually, I'm wrong. Not to 22. From 8 to the end, Indiana's the only same because only same. Washington State jumped in at 22. They were out. Colorado jumped in at 23. I called on Thursday that if they beat Cincinnati that I could see them jump to the top 25. They did. And then Illinois and Missouri round out the top 25. Vanderbilt dropped out, which I don't necessarily agree with. And then Navy
right?
Out because of how badly they lost to Notre Dame, which I understand. And I don't have a problem with the AP dropping Navy out. I have a problem with the coaches poll dropping Navy out and putting Memphis in. That's the issue that I had with the coaches poll. But
yeah, they beat Memphis, and they beat them, I mean, by
convincingly.
Scores.
Yeah, 12 points, and it was like Memphis kind of made it close late, but not really. And Memphis does, Memphis's best win is, I think, over North Texas, and Navy's best win is over Memphis. But I was really surprised, Vince, at the reaction to Notre Dame's victory from a ranking standpoint. Because, like, when the coaches poll came out, they were 9. So they went from 11 to 9. I was all right, cool. Like that's an expected jump. I was like, but the AP is probably going to have 10 or 11 because the coaches poll has been, for the most part, higher on Notre Dame this year. Not by a ton, but like a spot or two. Most of the year, Notre Dame was 11 in the coaches poll last week, and they were 12 in the AP poll. And then you get up to it, you get up to this week, and Notre Dame goes up 2. So I'm thinking, okay, they'll probably go up a spot or 2 in the AP poll. That's why I was thinking 11 or 10.
Yeah.
And then they come out and the AP poll has them at 8. Now they're closer to 9 than they are to 7. They're 5 points ahead of BYU, and they're 81 points behind Tennessee, which, if you look at the rankings, is not that bad. I mean, because Tennessee's going to have to play at least one team ranked ahead of them both right now, which is Georgia. And if Tennessee beats Georgia, then Notre Dame will be ahead of Georgia. Georgia, just like Bama, if Georgia loses another one, they'll fall a decent number of spots. So I think there's twofold. So if you look at all the movement, Vince, it was a lot of movement, but there wasn't a ton of teams moving a lot. Sometimes it does that. I think I'm muting myself, and then it won't let me mute, and then you guys hear me clear my throat, so I apologize. You can clean that. You can take that out of there later, Vince, when you're editing. But so you had Clemson dropping 2 spots, Iowa State down 2, BYU went up 2. They're now ahead of Iowa State, which is what they should be ahead of Iowa State. Bama went up 1, Boise went up 2. LSU dropped 8 because they got beat by 12. K-State dropped 1, Pitt went up 1, Ole Miss went down 1, SMU went up 2, Army went up 2. Illinois dropped 4, Missouri dropped 4. So there's a lot of small little jumps in there. But Notre Dame went up 4, and Texas A&M went up 4, which were the 2 highest jumps of the week.
Yeah.
And I think to a degree that plays together. If you're going to jump up A&M 4, then you've got to remember, by the way, this Notre Dame team beat this Texas A&M team by 10 at their place, right? Same place that they just beat LSU. And you say, well, they're a different team now. Well, then you can't hold Notre Dame's loss to Northern Illinois against them if you're going to say, well, it's a different team now because, okay, well, Notre Dame's a different team, and you can't say, well, we're going to discount this loss at the beginning of the season, but we're not going to discount this loss at the beginning of the season. So I think that's part of it. So obviously Texas A&M going up from 14 to 10 with their 15-point win, over LSU, then I think that's going to naturally give Notre Dame a boost. But I also think that, and I could be wrong, I'm just reading this, I think there was also some genuine, okay, I might be wrong about this Notre Dame team after the game on Saturday, because there was a lot of people in the media, the national media, writers and analysts, that viewed Navy as a top 25 team. That's why they were voted in as a top 25 team.
Sure.
But, they knew that it was away from home for Notre Dame, and there was a lot of people that picked Notre Dame to win. Or Notre Dame to lose. Joel Klatt picked Notre Dame to lose, and I know he wasn't alone. And there was a lot of people that picked Notre Dame to win, or they didn't pick at all, that were kind of like, hey, I think it's going to be a game. I think it's going to be a competitive game.
A competitive game, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And heck, I even kind of somewhat had it competitive. I had it as 11-point game for 11-point win for Notre Dame, which meant I didn't have them covering. And I believe I'm the only one of the IB analysts that didn't have them covering, if I remember correctly. If you go back and look at the rankings, I know you had them winning, I think, by 17.
Yeah, it was the 31-17. So
right. 14. So you had them covering, but
barely.
Not by a ton, because we liked. Look, the reality is, Vince, you and I and all the team at Irish Breakdown, we have a lot of respect for this Navy football team because they're a good football team. Notre Dame made them not look like one, but Notre Dame's had a tendency of doing that in the past. So if you look at that, and then Trevor had, I think, 30, you had 31-17, Stiers had 38-20. Trevor had it 34-17. Nick had it 35-17. Andrew McDonough had it 34-17. I mean, we were all kind of close. Joe Everett had it 35-28. So actually, Joe also had it a much more competitive game, but he was even closer than I was. I didn't think it'd be all that close. And I also said in our show that part of me wanted to predict it to be an even bigger blowout. So I think a lot of the pollsters, Vince, were hopefully, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I think a lot of them were intellectually honest and looked at that Notre Dame victory and said, hey, this is maybe we were wrong about Notre Dame. You know, maybe this Notre Dame team is a little bit better than we thought it was, and ranked them appropriately. I think that had a big say. That had a big say in my opinion, in why they went up the rankings.
Yeah, I was shocked, to be honest with you, when I pulled that up, because I didn't think that they would be in the single digits again after the Navy. Because here's what I thought would happen, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, I do think the Texas A&M win over LSU did help a degree. I think that was part of it. But I figured we would get the same thought process that usually happens when Navy's a pretty good to decent team, is that, well, they might lose to Navy, but then when they actually do win and win convincingly, it was Navy. Like, you're supposed to do that. It was Navy. You know what I mean? Like, they would totally talk out of both sides of their mouths. And I say they by the media and the people who vote on the AP poll, right? The Associated Press people. I mean, I just figured they'd be like, well, it's Navy. They should do that, regardless of. But now the point that you made to me, which I think was a really, really good one, was that the AP had Navy ranked. So you have to give respect to Notre Dame for beating a ranked team, because you had them ranked. Like, right. I mean, you can't really talk out of both sides of your mouth when you're the one that said that Navy was really good, and then Notre Dame did that to Navy. You can't be like, well, it's just Navy, because most of the time Navy's not ranked, right? I mean, it's been 5 years since they played against each other and they were both ranked, and Notre Dame
and the number of games they've
in
played
that game too
in history where they were both ranked is
it's minuscule. I mean, it's not a large number.
It's a very small.
It's not a large number. So, you know, they almost had their hands tied behind their back a little bit when it came to this ranking, because Notre Dame beat a team that they had already ranked, and they beat them 51-14. And to be honest with you, Navy didn't look good. And we talked about that in the post-game show. And, you know, even the announcers kind of talk, which they're not wrong. Navy played their worst game that they've played all year. They did. But Notre Dame had a hand in that. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's like that's where you get all these teams that don't turn the ball over very much, and then they just, like, Louisville came into that game and hadn't turned the ball over all year, not once all year, and they turned it over multiple times against Notre Dame. And it's just like, it's a coincidence, I'm sure, you know. But you know, I'm a little bit of sarcasm in that comment, but. Yeah, like, I think part of the issue that some of us have, and I'll be honest, is we tend to allow ourselves to get skewed by what the national, like, ESPN says. And then we listen to the broadcasters run their mouths the whole game about Notre Dame and Navy and blah, blah, blah. And then we hear the stupid analysts. And, like, there's this guy that does college. His name's, I think, Matt Berry. He's the worst. His analysis, so it's not even surface level, Vince. Like, it would be an improvement if his analysis was surface level. And you just see some stuff and you're like, yeah, that's how, but not everybody thinks that way. And like, I know, I'll be honest, like, I know an AP voter. Well, obviously, we both know Eric Hansen, but I know there's a guy named Dylan Sin who writes for the Fort Wayne newspaper. Really nice kid. You and I both know Dylan. And I don't often agree with Dylan's rankings, as I probably wouldn't agree with yours and mine completely if we both did rankings. But what I like about Dylan is I know for a fact that Dylan puts a lot of thought into his rankings. He does it because he wants to be right how he sees it. And, like, he's not alone. I know he's not alone. There's some people that are just total clowns, and they say things to get noticed or, you know, whatever. Like, you know, there was one guy last week that had, you know, Notre Dame 20th, and, like, it's just, there were some really bizarre rankings, and we'll just leave it at that, right? But
so those
I
get
do think there's they do. Like you and I both know Eric Hansen. Whatever our feelings may or may not be about Eric Hansen, I think both of us would say that I think when Eric Hansen puts a rankings together, that he's giving you, in his opinion, his legitimate, this is what I truly believe, top 25. Whether I think, hey, I think he's wrong here, I think he's wrong there, I disagree with this there, he disagree with mine. I think he's giving you an honest analysis of the rankings. And I do think there's a lot of people like that because, as you said, they are published, they are out there, and they also know that if they get something egregiously wrong, that they're going to hear about it. Now, some people feed on that, and that's why I think they do certain things, is because they know that they're going to get, that they're going to get attention, and some people just,
that's all
they feast on that. So, so that's kind of where I'm at, Vince. I was surprised to see Notre Dame make such a jump. That's really what it boils down to. I really did not expect Notre Dame to make the leap that they made. I mean, they went from 12 to 8, but they also went up over 100 points on the week. They went from 891 points to 1,000 points in one game against Navy. And like I said, I think the fact that they did view Navy respectfully gave into why I think they felt it wasn't just that Notre Dame won.
Sure.
And anyone that actually watched that game is going to look at that and be like, yeah, Navy made mistakes, part of it for Notre Dame, but Notre Dame had 302 yards of offense at the half. Right. Notre Dame was on pace for over 600 yards of offense. And so it's not like they recovered a bunch of short field fumbles and turned them into points, and they didn't do a whole lot other than that. Notre Dame was on pace for over 600 yards, and if they didn't yank their starters, basically after one drive of the third quarter, that's exactly what the offense would have done. They were not going to be stopped by Navy. And so I was pleasantly surprised with that, Victor. Now, I would argue that I still think they need to be at least a spot higher, if not 2 spots higher.
For where you think they should be now, or
yes, and I'll make that case when I do my rankings for the college football playoff projections, because again, I know that they have a worse loss than Tennessee and Texas, but Notre Dame has significantly better wins, in my opinion, than Texas, and they have a better win than Tennessee. Because well, hold on a second now. Tennessee beat Alabama. Well, Alabama's ranked 14th and A&M's ranked 10th. Tennessee beat Alabama at home. Tennessee beat Alabama at home. Notre Dame beat A&M on the road. So got a road win compared to your best win being at home, and you got yours against a team ranked higher. So, and I think there's after that you look at Tennessee's record and like, but what's the other good wins they have? That's my case. But I'm not like gonna pound it like I can't believe Tennessee's ahead of Notre Dame. Can't believe Texas is ahead of Notre Dame. I'm not gonna say that because some of Notre Dame's wins early in the season weren't overly impressive with how they played.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm okay with 8th. I would simply argue that they can go up a couple. But I was surprised they went up the way and especially since they leaped. So the reason they got from 12 to 8, Vince, is they obviously went past LSU, who fell out.
Right.
And then they also leaped BYU, who's undefeated and won Saturday, convincingly went on the road and beat UCF. That surprised me a little bit. And I think that's partly because BYU's still not getting any respect. I think that's honestly part of it.
I don't you could argue, Big 12 is getting much respect, period.
And to a degree, it shouldn't. But I think BYU's got some impressive wins. And I think they've looked like a good football team. If I was doing it, I would jump Notre Dame ahead of Tennessee, but I would also make an argument that you should have BYU ahead of Notre Dame, which would leave Notre Dame still at 8. Right? But they also leaped Clemson and Iowa State,
right,
who were both idle. And so Clemson fell to about where they should be because again, Clemson has no good
Clemson
wins.
Was way too high last week.
Yes, like I'll give you some data, Vince. So I'm putting this rankings together, and the way that I'm doing a college football playoff projection. So I put a poll up at Irish Breakdown, and ask people, hey, would you want this kind of thing of me giving you my projections? Because I think it's so lazy. The projection now is like, this is based off where things stand today. Well, anyone can do that. I can just look at the AP freaking poll and do that. You know what I mean?
I did it this afternoon.
Right. It means you did. It means nothing. I'm going to project where I think things are going to go. So if 2 teams play each other, I'm not going to leave them where they're ranked right now. I'm going to do some level of projection of that game. But the things I look at is I look at the overall win percentage of your opponents and the overall record of your opponents, and then also what is the winning record and the winning percentage of the teams that you've beat. And then I also look at the number of wins over top 20 over teams that are above 500. And then I also look at like the Sagarin rankings, the FEI, which hasn't come out yet, the FPI, and those type of things. So when you look at Notre Dame right now, they have 7 wins over teams with records above 500. Ohio State has 4, A&M has 4, Texas has 4, Bama has 5. So that resume for Notre Dame is impressive. They're also 6th on the Sagarin rankings, and they're 5th on the FPI. And I think there's some people coming around to, hey, the computers like Notre Dame a lot. Why is that? And I think that's part of this data too, is people are looking at the numbers and being like, okay, this Notre Dame team, maybe they're better than we think. And then when you start looking at their resume and you start looking at the teams they've beat, Vince, it's like, okay, sure, they haven't beat teams impressively. I mean, they haven't beat a lot of great teams. They have 3 wins over teams that were ranked. But it's also the fact that they're getting to the point now where it's like they're not even playing competitive games anymore. You know what I mean, Vince? So like since the Northern Illinois loss, they've won games by 59, 25, 42, 18, and 37. And then they have a 7-point win in which they led for, it was like over 52 minutes. And had a double-digit lead for over half the game. So their game control against Louisville was impressive. And so you're like, they're just, I mean, you start looking at this and you're like, only one team scored above 16 points on that defense. Wow. And I think that might be the thing that maybe woke people up the most is this defense is legit.
Well, yeah.
And the offense is waking up. Like in this last 3 games, and this is this thing we talked about, Vince, in their last 3 games, Notre Dame is averaging as a team is averaging 43.7 points per game in its last 3 games. And if you add the Louisville game in there and make it the last 4 games, they're averaging 40.5 points per game. And I think people are starting to recognize that and be like, wow, this team actually is a little better than we think. And you're even seeing some Notre Dame fans that I have been down on this team starting to slowly come around to that reality as well. And I think yesterday's impressive win was a big reason for that, in my opinion. It's not the only one, but it's a big reason for that.
Well, and they're and just to your point about the defense, in that 3-game stretch, they're giving up just a shade over 10 points a game in that 3-game stretch. So not only are they scoring over 40, they're giving up just over 10. Like it's like 10.1 or something like that, or 10 point. It's 10 point something. You know what I mean? So to your point, they're scoring a ton of points. They're not allowing any points. And they're looking good while they do it. And I think, let's see, how often did the second team play the entire 4th quarter as well in those games? You know what I mean? Like,
so in the last 3 games, somebody was trying to spin some stats the other day. He's like, well, you know, I mean, we don't really have a great passing attack. Riley Leonard's only threw for 178 yards. I was like, he played 1 possession of the 3rd quarter, and that's it. Right? He had 141 at halftime. But in their last 3 games
of that.
Right. In their last 3 games, Riley Leonard has not played in the 4th quarter of 2 of those 3 games.
Right. Right.
So, yeah. And your starters primarily. So, Vince, in the period that I was talking about, the last 4 games, Notre Dame's given up 14.5 points per game. If you go at the last 6 games, that's where the number you were referring to comes into play. I think it's up to 11.3 because of the Navy game. It was 10.6 coming into the Navy game. It's up to 11.3.
Okay.
I was just doing 11 points. No,
I was just doing the last 3 games. Even.
Yeah. The last, because
they've given up 7, 13,
divided by 3, 11.3.
Okay.
So 7 plus 13 plus 14 is 34 points divided by 3. It's 11.3. The point is, Vince, 10.6, 11.3. It's really good. You know what, Vince? What I think you did is here. Hold on a second. So this is actually where I think if you look at what they've scored against the first team defense, they've only given them 9.3 points per game because both Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech scored a touchdown on Notre Dame's second team defense.
Right.
So
you take 7 points out of that. Yeah. The bottom line is offense is scoring, defense isn't, and Notre Dame has leapt into the top 10 in the AP poll, which is obviously where they belong. We can talk about whether they belong at 8, 7, 6, whatever, but the jump from 12 to 8 was surprising. It was surprising based on the narratives that are out there and that we usually hear when it comes to Notre Dame, and when it comes to Notre Dame versus Navy as well. And just one more piece of this too, Brian. We were talking about teams that are idle. We were talking about Clemson and Ohio State. Iowa State, and how they dropped while they were idle. But guess who went up 2 spots when they were idle? Army. Yeah. They went up 2 slots as an idle team last week. So from 23 to 21. And if I'm not mistaken, and I just want to pull it up here so I have it in front of me. They're off, obviously, yesterday. Then they've got the Air Force. And Air Force I think they've got 1 win this year.
So 1-6.
That should be a win. And then they've got North Texas, which is 5-3. So that'll be a game for sure.
2 back-to-back competitive losses to good football teams, by the way.
Yep. And that's at
Lost
North
to Memphis
Texas,
by 8 and Tulane by 8.
So that's on the road. And then they have another bye week, and then they've got Notre Dame. So I would say the chances of Army being a top 20 team, if they go 2-0 over the next 2 weeks, they're going to be a top 20 team.
Yeah, the North Texas game is going to be the one to watch.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's a team that can score. The North Texas can score a little bit, and that always they're averaging 40 points per game. The problem is North Texas has given up 36.9 points per game.
And there's your
their rush defense is giving up 177 yards per game. So but again, they can get into a shootout with you just like Memphis did with Navy.
Sure.
So anyway, somebody in the chat said, sorry, Vince, I don't think the playoff committee will give Notre Dame any credit for beating Army. This is where some of you need to get out of your emotions.
I disagree.
And look at and stop assuming that the committee is going to look at these teams the same way that you do. Just because you don't respect the service academies doesn't mean that the committee's not going to look at them and rank them. And the reality is if the playoff committee, we don't know that they will, but if the playoff committee puts Army in its top 25, and I don't know that they will, Vince, because as I've argued, Army hasn't played anybody.
Agreed.
Like the whole Navy hasn't played anybody. That was a myth because they beat Memphis, who now is in the coaches poll top 25 and is 7-1. Army has not played anybody. And I don't know that Army is going to be in the top 25. But if they do, then clearly the committee is going to give Notre Dame credit for beating them. That's nonsense to think that they won't. Here's the other thing you're not giving enough thought to with that type of. I just think it's a I don't want to say shallow because I don't mean that disrespectfully.
It's just short-sighted.
Yes, it's narrow-minded is a way of looking at it, is because you're just looking at the name. And if you're going to say that, then okay, well then are we going to give Notre Dame extra credit for beating USC even if they're not good? You know what I mean? So it's just there's his response is even more emotional than the first one. It's like, look,
I don't even have it open,
it's probably best. The reality is that the committee will absolutely give them credit for a ranked team that they beat. And that's the other thing is Notre Dame's going to need Navy to keep winning as well.
Sure.
And because they were only like 4th, 3rd, and 5th in the others receiving votes. They didn't completely fall off the radar.
They're 29.
So anyway, Vince, and so why does all this matter? Well, I think it matters is because it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into what people outside of Notre Dame think about the Notre Dame team. Some people on the committee will view things similarly to the voters. Some won't. But it also is a perception thing. I keep saying this. It's a perception thing. And when you look at it again, like, wow, that team's ranked and that team's ranked. And you look at the box score and you're like, that team was dominant over that team. And you look at the final score and you say, it's going to matter. Plus, there's a perception of how Notre Dame is viewed. All of a sudden, you're talking to recruits. They're all of a sudden, Notre Dame's back into being a top 10 football team. You know, Alabama's this, Alabama that. Well, right now, Notre Dame's ranked well ahead of Alabama. Those things matter. Those things matter. So anyway, Vince, I just thought that was a very interesting thing to look at. It's going to be interesting, obviously, what the playoff committee does. But the playoff committee, and this is where I also think there's some shallow thought here, is that the playoff committee has always been more positive on Notre Dame than the voters, the AP and the coaches.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Always.
Wholeheartedly. Yep.
And so if they're viewing Notre Dame 8th and 9th, then where would the committee view Notre Dame? And that's what's going to make it very interesting. Very interesting.
The fun part is Notre Dame's going to be idle, obviously, next week. And then the rankings come out on Tuesday. And so, what happens during the week that Notre Dame's idle?
Yeah.
Eating cheeseburgers, as Charlie Weiss would say. Like, what happens then?
They're not eating cheeseburgers. Well, and you look at the games next week, let's look at what's on the docket for next week. Number 3, Penn State plays number 4, Ohio State. If Penn State beats Ohio State, Notre Dame will leap Ohio State and should leap Ohio State. Because then what's the win that Ohio State's banking their resume on at this point in time? They've played 2 good teams and got beat by both of them.
Correct.
If Ohio State beats Penn State, I think Penn State probably stays ahead of Notre Dame, even though their resume isn't overly impressive either. But I do think Penn State at least would have a couple quality wins and a perceived much better loss. Well, it wouldn't be perceived. It would be a much better loss. If Ohio State blows Penn State out, which I don't see happening, at least based on what they played today, then that'll have an impact on it. So you have that matchup. Duke plays at number 5 Miami. That's not going to have any impact. Michigan hosts Oregon. That's not going to. Yeah.
I kind of hope I said this to you earlier today. I kind of hope Miami wins out at this point. Because they're going to be. They'll be the dominant team in the ACC, and everybody. And there's going to be a chasm between them and everybody else. And then, honestly, at that point, Miami might be the only ACC bid. The ACC and the Big 12 have a chance of being a one-team.
Yeah,
at this point,
if Clemson wins out and Miami beats them, I still think Clemson's in at 11-2.
Okay,
they would need Clemson to lose again. Speaking of, Clemson hosts Louisville this weekend.
Right, and there you go.
So that'll be an interesting one, But then again, if Clemson loses to Louisville and then goes and beats Miami, now you've got 2 teams in. So I still think the ACC right now is on track for 2 teams. Plus, you got Pitt, who's undefeated. We'll see what they do. But their computer rankings,
the hard part of their schedules coming up.
And they're like you look at some of this, like the FPI and the Sagarin rankings. Pitt is not great on either. They're 26 in the Sagarin and they're 32nd in the FPI. Notre Dame is 6th and 5th. In those rankings. So
Pitt's playing SMU at SMU, by the way,
right?
Saturday night. So that's going to be a tough game too.
And neither of those teams are going to jump ahead of Notre Dame unless they run the table. Tennessee hosts Kentucky; they're bad. So there probably won't be. Texas A&M and South Carolina should be interesting. I hope there's no letdown game for Texas A&M.
Going on the road winning should help them.
Yeah, Iowa State hosts Texas Tech. Texas Tech's been a gamey team this year at times. So not a lot of great action this weekend, to be honest with you, Vince, outside of the Penn State Ohio State game.
And that one's at
to
noon.
Be honest.
It's going to be out of the gate.
That's one of only 2 ranked matchups all weekend, the other being Pitt and SMU.
Correct.
So not a great weekend of football. But the last time we had a not great weekend of football, I think Vanderbilt beat Alabama and Arkansas beat Tennessee. And you know what I mean?
Good point. No, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So we'll see how it plays out.
This right now, I think Notre Dame is sitting in a very advantageous spot, and they just need to continue doing what they are doing. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? And so I'm just surprised that they are there today. I thought maybe it'd take another week to get them up to where they are now, but hey, take it where you can get it. And in 9 days, the AP poll is irrelevant. So I think that also comes into play here as well. I mean, it's the only poll that we have besides the coaches poll to discuss, and so that's what we're doing. But in 9 days, when the CFP rankings come out, the AP poll becomes completely irrelevant, and we're talking about the college football playoff poll. So
I cannot wait for that.
I know, right?
Cannot wait for that.
I know, and that's Tuesday evening, I do believe.
Weekend. Do it. That's going to be a weird day. I was shocked. I was like, isn't that election day?
It's election day.
Then I found out like all these people are voting early. I was like, when did that become a thing?
Yeah, that's not. No, I go on election day. That's we have a tradition in my house. We go. I take the kids.
Same here.
But I think actually my one kid might actually work the polls, so that's good. Get him involved. And
very nice.
Yeah, so Tuesday, Sean actually pointed this out to me. Sean Stiers pointed this out to me. So you've got election day, you've got the rankings coming out, and it's the NFL trade deadline. So you got a lot of stuff going on.
That's going to be a crazy day.
Right.
Crazy
So,
day.
yeah, lots going on Tuesday. So, but as the kids would say, you got to buckle up. You got to buckle up. Here we go. Do the sign here. So that's going to do it for our AP poll talk. Thanks for hanging out with us. Make sure you hit the like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Brian put a poll up. You could have voted in the poll if you were a member of the board. Yeah. I'm just saying.
It was overwhelming victory for those who wanted me to do a playoff projection.
It's usually an overwhelming victory for when they want you to do more work. That's usually kind of how it works. But your work is displayed front and center on boards.irishbreakdown.com. So if you want to see it, you want to be a part of it, you got to get over there. So make sure you do that.